And when we looked at the Common Core and what's coming in the future, some decisions we had to kind of make about changing that and how we made those decisions and sort of what went into that when we met with the teachers this year and some of the scaffolding we're trying to do for them to help to get ready for the Common Core. The other thing, I used Prezi because, you know, I thought, okay, everybody sees PowerPoint, I'm going to try this. I don't know if it's going to be helpful because you can't do as much text on it, but I just thought I was going to try this. So, at our middle school, which is 6, 7, 8, and we have 3 middle schools, primarily the way teachers taught novels were they had sort of 2 sets. One was independent student novels. The students decided what novels they wanted to read, and they simply read them on their own, and they did some activities with them that they turned in, sometimes summaries or, you know, reflections, that kind of thing. And they totally had the choice of what they wanted to read. Sometimes the teacher might direct them a little bit, but for the most part, they just picked what they wanted to read. The other was classroom novels for the entire class, and those were novels that were usually chosen by what the teacher thought the kids might be interested in, what we had enough of, for example, 30 for every kid to have one in the classroom, just in class, not to take home, because they took none of these home. And everything was read aloud to them, either through a CD or through the teacher reading the novel to them. And then, of course, we had short stories and things like that. But as for the novels, that was how it was done. And many of the novels were not maybe the kind of novels that we're going to be expected to teach the kids with the Common Core at a higher level, at least at their grade level, that kind of thing. So we started to think about, you know, how were we going to make some changes there. The other issue we had was we were seeing at the middle school that our upper level kids were not getting value added. They weren't getting that stretch in language arts that they need on their OAA. The reading test wasn't reflecting that. And then another thing we had that we've been working on for a while was our at-risk kids, especially our IEP students, were really struggling with reading. You could see it on the OAA. We weren't meeting value add, or we weren't meeting AYP, although sometimes we could get value added and that would get us AYP. So last year we started looking, at least for the kids that were at risk in IEP, the idea of, we have a blocked language arts, 2 periods. Historically, it was just 2 periods of traditional language arts. But last year we started looking at the idea of one of those periods needed to be direct instruction of reading. So we started actually doing professional development on direct instruction of reading. We kind of started a little bit last year, second semester, people trying some of that. And it was the idea that you have kids in flexible groups at their instructional level, that they are pulled up with the teacher, just like you might see in an elementary school with Literacy Collaborative. But we sort of tweaked it and changed some things because you're talking about teachers who now have many more students than an elementary teacher is going to have. You know, they might have 25 students, whereas these people might have 90 students, and so we had to make some changes. The elementary model wasn't going to work for us. So this year we implemented it across the board at 6th, 7th, and 8th. Everybody's supposed to be doing the guided reading one of the periods. The other period is supposed to be the more traditional language arts class that they. So that's kind of what we were looking at. So what we wanted to figure out was how can we help the teachers transition into doing all class novels that are more of a stretch for the kids, because for one thing, we thought that might help our higher level kids to maybe make more of that growth. And we know that the kids have to be exposed to these higher level readings, even if that is not where they are as far as their reading level. So that was kind of that's the setup. So we had to figure out, okay, how were we going to determine the text? And so there are two things we looked at. We looked at the model for text complexity in the Common Core, and the qualitative piece is the meaning or purpose, structure, language, conventionality, clarity, knowledge the kids have to bring, all of that. We looked at that when we were looking at the books. We looked at, of course, what we think of as readability, where you do a Fry readability or a Smog. And then we also looked at reader and task considerations. You know, what do we want them to do with it? How might they be motivated by the book? That kind of thing. So we tried to look at that, and then we also tried to look at the interest. You know, how would the kids be interested in this? We got all of the teachers together at the beginning of the year, the language arts teachers or representatives from their buildings and grade levels, and we talked about what novels do you do in class. And we came up with 3 at each grade level, 2 that the teachers had to all do at each grade level any way they wanted to. If they wanted to still read aloud or whatever, that was fine. And 1 at each grade level that nobody had done before, really, across the board at the grade level, that we were going to, as a group, get together and plan. And then that was going to be one where the kids were each going to have a book to take home. So we sort of decided on the novels, the 3 novels we wanted to do, and we figured I then was going to have to look at the novels and figure out which grade level were they best going to go with. So we figured out that we wanted to do Dragon Wings, The Hunger Games, and Dark is Rising. And we thought we would do The Hunger Games at 8th grade, Dark is Rising at 7th, and Dragon Wings at 6th. And Dragon Wings and Dark is Rising are both on the exemplar list for the Common Core. The Hunger Games are not. So those were the 3 we decided on. So when we left, I did some research and found out what the levels were for each book, what each book was about, to determine, okay, which one's going at which grade level. Once we figured that out, each teacher was going to get a copy of that book, and then they were going to read it and do some other things before we met as a big group to start planning. So I looked at the books, and Dragon Wings ended up being a 6.1 reading level. It's historical fiction about an immigrant boy from China. Now I also looked at the social studies, the new social studies component, the standards, and they do China. Now they don't do China at this time period. This is like the turn of the 20th century. But they do China historically. So the names and some of that would not be totally new to those students. They would have heard some of that. They would have heard some about Chinese culture. So I felt that this one at 6.1, they would already have some background knowledge about China. That was a good fit for there, especially maybe if they do it at the end of the year. But so we picked Dragon Wings for 6th grade. Hunger Games, that we thought was going to go at 8th grade, is 5.3 reading level. So we just, that's just too much of a stretch to do it at 8th grade. But the fact that it's fantasy, the fact that it's got some violence in it, the fact that with fantasy you have new concepts because it's a world building, so you don't have that background knowledge to bring to it, we felt that that was an okay stretch, that stretched that text out beyond just the reading level, because you do look at things other than the reading level. You look at the vocabulary, you look at what background knowledge is the kid going to have to create or find or build or come with. And so we decided the Hunger Games was going to be 7th grade. And then the Dark is Rising, which is 7.1. It's also fantasy. So once again, you have that world building. So even though it's a year behind as far as the readability, we felt that that would be a good choice for 8th grade. So that was how we decided the 3 books that each teacher has to teach at the end of this year. The other thing we told them is, as you read the book, you have to look for 2 things. And they needed to read this book before we got together so that we could start planning. You need to look for the chapters that kids have to know, have to hear or read to understand the book. So that might be the very first chapter, or the chapter when, several chapters that something really, impactful to the meaning of the book happens. But it should not be half of the book, maybe a quarter of the book at the most. But you have to choose, and you have to think about why this chapter. You can't just say, well, chapter 5, what's your rationale? And what vocabulary words are important for the kids to know. So those were the 2 things the teachers had to prep when they came in. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so the next thing we decided to do is we wanted to get them together as a grade level to plan. We have a full day, in-service day, where the students don't come, and that's the day we decided to do it. So we were going to get them together to plan. We had a lead teacher. I took the 7th grade book. Maura Horgan, who's the curriculum director for secondary, took the 8th grade book. And the department chair at the high school took the 6th grade book. And these are, the 3 of us understanding by design, and sort of what the focus of, or what our goals were. And so we were going to be the lead teachers and plan with those other teachers. So what we wanted to do is kind of give the teachers a little brief introduction of understanding by design. We wanted them then to get into 7th grade, 8th grade, 6th grade groups with their book and plan what they were going to do. And we wanted them to bring in other genres, especially nonfiction and poetry. So the idea of the novel with a theme, for example, the Hunger Games, one of the themes was survival and the morality of survival. So what other pieces can you bring into that? So it's not, you're just teaching that novel, but you're teaching nonfiction pieces. Like one of the nonfiction pieces that somebody brought in was a 9/11 piece, an article that went with the theme of survival. Or what poetry can you bring in there? So when we met, and we had told them, if you can think of anything that kind of goes with this book, then bring that with you that day too. And then of course the standards. How are they going to fit with the standards? We also wanted to think of ways to scaffold these books for readers who were below that reading level. Like, we have a lot of kids that are not at 6.1 at 6th grade. And so what are you going to do to help them understand that book and be successful? And then the enrichment, and we felt just that idea that the kids are taking these home, they're reading it on their own, and they're going to come back and have, we hope, rich discussion and activities at a higher level book than they may have been picking. It's going to help with the enrichment and ultimately have some deeper learning for all of the kids. So what happened was all the grade levels came together at the beginning. So we had all the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers. And we did a little informational kind of thing. You have several sheets that you picked up over there, and if you didn't get them, I will give them to Carol so that she can put them on the blog. But the first thing we did was sort of go over very briefly UBD, because anybody who's done UBD knows it's a big deal. But we wanted to get the idea of the enduring understandings and the essential questions. And that idea of a theme or a major topic, that the umbrella that's everything's gonna fit under. So the sheets that I gave you, and I'm not gonna go over these, but this is a sheet we used that had some definitions, and it had some examples of enduring understandings and essential questions. And then this was something I found on the internet, UBD in a nutshell, that looks at each of the steps of UBD. so that you can actually, the teachers could look more deeply into that if they wanted to. We sort of talked about those, but this was more of just a reference for them. What we ended up doing was going over the unit curriculum map, which was one that we made out. We thought a lot of people would know Animal Farm, so we used that as our example. It was not one that anybody was going to use in their grade level. We didn't want to, step on the toes or anything. And so we came up with all of the different pieces, the theme, the enduring understandings, the essential questions. The other thing we did is we took it at each grade level for the standards, the writing standards, the reading, and we used the current academic content standards. We weren't about to also make them try to bring in the Common Core at the same time that we're trying to make this transition. So, we looked at, if you were teaching Animal Farm at 6th grade, what could be your reading standards? What would be your writing standards, your research standards, listening, speaking? So at each grade level, so they could then go back and kind of look and see how did that work together. And you could just kind of look. We had some anchor text, poetry, which had some music with it, because one of the things we looked at was the idea of revolution. So we looked at Tracy Chapman's Revolution, comparing it to the Beatles' Revolution, short stories, and we really tried to direct them to look at the textbook. What sort of stories in their textbook, because each level has one, might work with that. And drama, Anne Frank, A Woman Called Truth, and then nonfiction. We thought, pieces on the Russian Revolution could be something you'd bring in, but we just went through that because then that's what we were going to do with them. For their novel, we were going to fill out this map. So the next thing we did was we broke into each grade level, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, with that lead teacher who was going to direct the planning. And it was pretty good. I mean, it definitely, I think we had great conversations about it. One of the things that we really had to talk about, though, was scaffolding. How are we going to help these kids who are not at that grade level? And so we came up with a variety of ways to do that, and I'll just talk about each one. The first one was the idea of really being focused on which chapters do we have to read aloud and why. If you have a chapter that has concepts that are just so difficult that the kids can't understand them, then that may be one that you're going to have to read aloud. Or reading aloud, the very first 2 chapters, because that sets up the setting, which in a fantasy might be, a difficult to understand if it's a new world. Sets up introducing your characters. So that was a big part we thought that would help those kids who had difficulty with reading. That also, hopefully, if we pick the right ones, would continue to keep their interest in the book and make them want to try to read as much as they could. The other part was the important vocabulary. We looked at the idea of we have to introduce that vocabulary to the students before they see it, so that they have some sense of the vocabulary. And then we also have to have activities throughout the reading for them to interact with the vocabulary. And we had talked about just doing vocabulary sorts. And those are quick, easy ways for kids to continually interact with vocabulary that take maybe 5 minutes, 3 minutes, that you can do every single day. You can do sorts, and you just put the vocabulary words on an index card. The kids are in a group of maybe 3 or 4 kids. You give them the vocabulary words and you say, sort into 2 categories. You pick the categories. And then the next day, maybe you say sort into a sequence. Give me a sequence of those words. And it's the idea that they're thinking about what do the words mean, how can I put them together. And as we know, vocabulary is a toughie because you can't just say, here's the vocabulary, and have them understand that. They're supposed to interact with it, 17, 18 times to really begin to understand it. Well, thinking about doing that with your kids, That's a lot of time, unless you find some short ways for them to have intense thinking about it that don't take a lot of class time. So we talked about that. The idea of the chapters that are not going to be read aloud, people would do summaries. Like the teachers might do a summary of that chapter, very brief summary, that the students who are below reading level could have access to. That would not be something that they would do and pass out to all the kids. But this is just to keep, and the other thing we had to get past was that idea that every kid has to read every word of every sentence for this to be a good experience for them. Okay. So the summarizing of the non-read aloud chapters. The other part was we have the direct instruction of reading one of the periods. During the time period you're doing this novel, those flexible groups are brought up, and what they're doing in the group is the novel. So you are doing direct instruction on that novel where they're going to have difficulty. And that, I think, is one of the greatest pieces we have with this, the way we have this set up. The other kids who are above the reading levels, they also have guided reading, so you bring them up and you do something beyond. Maybe you do a higher even reading level article, nonfiction article with them in their guided reading groups. But that kind of gives you the flexibility to do small group direct instruction with them on a novel that they're going to have some difficulty with. Paired reading was also an idea that we had. That you would put the kids together and maybe do somebody with a higher reading level with a lower reading level, and you would do paired reading. Graphic organizers are always a great way to help kids access text. And so if we could have some kind of graphic organizer, or even something where, like with the summaries, you do, some words missing, and they have to put those in as they're reading. And that's going to kind of help them follow along, but not have to understand the entire text as they're reading it. And then with the IEP students especially too, they have academic assist periods, making sure that in those academic assist periods, there's something where those teachers can work with them on the novel. So those were some of the scaffolding pieces we came up with. And I think the teachers felt a little better when they left, because they really had a concern about those kids reading these novels. But as we talked about, there's not going to be a choice with the Common Core and that idea of kids reading at their grade level and then later higher, that you need to stretch them. At least we need to have these kids having some kind of experience with their grade level reading. And so this was the way that we thought could, make it the best that we could. Right now, we have teachers, so they're supposed to do this fourth quarter. Now, I already know that some of them aren't going to. I've already heard that. But most of them are going to try. And so I also know that some teachers have already tried something to transition. Because you're talking about kids who haven't done this. They haven't been told, here's a book you don't get to pick. You need to take it home, and then we're going to do activities with what you've read. So, for example, an 8th grade teacher did A Day No Pigs Would Die, which is a 5th grade reading level. It's got some dialect in it, but, I don't think it's very difficult. Very short chapters. She did this with them. And she, picked the ones to read aloud. They did a lot of the reading on their own, and she said it was a great experience. I mean, she said the deep thinking they came away with was awesome. And so this helps them transition from, to where they're going to have an even higher reading level. And the kids who were below that, because we do have some kids who are below 5th grade in our 8th grade, they were brought up during guided reading, and that's how they worked with the text. And it ended up being really a good experience for her. And so, we've told other people, you might want to think about doing something that's a little less difficult before you transition into this other piece. And that's all we have, but I mean, I would love to hear what other people are doing, or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, if I can. I gave you a couple other things. I gave you this sheet on text complexity. It's got the website where it was found. And this one, you know, when I was looking at how do we do text complexity, there wasn't a whole lot out there, but this one I thought was pretty simple. You know, they left the middle, the evolving complexity out, but I thought, well, they must just think it's midway or something. But if you wanted to put something in there, you could. And then I found this one by achieve.org, and it also looks at text complexity in a variety of ways. And, you know, I just think right now we're so searching for how do we look at a book and decide what grade level it should be at. And even the ones that they give us for the exemplars, it's 6 through 8, they're just there, 6 through 8. And it's like, oh, pick where you're going to put it. But so how do you do that? And so I think, you know, these are at least some ideas, and maybe you can put them together until Park gets our tool out there.
And I don't know if anyone else has used the State of Kansas text complexity piece that Marcia referenced, because I actually used that with the group and it went over pretty well. They actually have a whole little like PowerPoint on their website that you can, you know, that leads you through the whole process. So it's pretty good. I like how your process is kind of taking it one piece at a time. Like you said, they didn't align it to the Common Core standard yet. They're just looking at what text are we using. So it's kind of a good idea so they're not overwhelmed, and I would imagine next year when you go back and say, now let's take this map we already have and we're going to have to revise some of the pieces to this. At least having been through that process, it should be a lot easier for them.
Hope so.
Yeah, well, hope so. In theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be. I definitely do, because they are going to have to start looking at the standards for language arts. We're going to be doing something with writing. Writing hasn't been a big push at the middle school too. And with that, because it hasn't been, we're just starting right out with the Common Core and the writing. So, any other thoughts about what you're doing? For example, that scaffolding, you know, for those kids who are not at that level, is anybody else doing anything? I mean, I would love to know some more ideas for scaffolding those novels, because, you know, we're going to have to be doing them in class, and you can't just say, well, you can't read it. I like you. You're a good guy. Sorry. I mean, so what are we going to do? Yeah.
I'm going to throw that. We're kind of going through a similar process and trying to hit text complexity and things like that. I love your stuff. It's really good. I love the way you approach it. We did our first thing was, and this is maybe a question for the group as well. I had them just, let's start with a poem or something like that, where we did, they all chose one. We had a group of 10 teachers, and they all chose a piece that was going to be a stretch text for their class, which in some cases, it's almost hard to say, okay, this is going to be a 6th grade book for the rest of our time, because for one group, it might be an 8th grade book because it's a stretch for them, because it's all sports kids and it's about something totally different. So just the interest levels, you know, I think it's going to be fluid a little bit on what we're choosing for those stretch texts sometimes, because some class might just have a lot of background and they can just go through it, where other ones, they've never been to China, they don't know China, they don't know where it is, you know, those kind of things. But we started with a really small piece, and they put it out, and they did think, because one of the words that we've been hearing over and over is independent, you know, it has to be done independently. So they had them read it once, do kind of a, annotate it a little bit, you know, their thoughts, and then they were asked to go read it again, put their thoughts again, you know, what was different. And they're just trying to lead them through a little of that metacognition, so they're starting to think about the text and what it is. And for the most part, one of the teachers, we met yesterday, and one of the teachers brought back samples. We're still homogeneously grouped. I know, a whole different story. But we're, so she has a top class and she has a lower class. And, looking at the top class, I don't think they were realizing what these kids could actually read. And then the lower class, it was interesting because their comments the first time, they were asking questions that were pretty far off base. And the second time, they were getting a little closer. And I think it's just a whole new shift on, we have to allow them to make meaning on that text. So, we're not there by any means, but I guess my question for the group after that long intro is, text complexity and length, does it necessarily have to be length all the time? And I'm thinking it can be small pieces rather than, we might not, I think a lot of our novels are going to be trade books, especially in the 6th grade that, kids are going to love and things like that, but we're also trying to, one of the pieces that we had was the Declaration of Independence in, I think, 6th grade or 7th grade, where we were going to touch that. So we're not necessarily looking at revamping all our novels to choose ones that are so difficult that we're losing that love of reading kind of thing. So just a thought. That's where we are,
And that's what we were doing too with the nonfiction and the poetry, that the idea that bringing in short articles that are difficult or a higher level reading, that you definitely want to do that because they have to be exposed to the nonfiction. But the other thing is with the nonfiction, doing a big nonfiction piece also is tough. So for one thing, just the cost. Usually the cost of a nonfiction book is very expensive. But so we're looking at doing the nonfiction in shorter pieces.
One thing that came up on Monday, I think that's where I heard this, was with the stretch text, they were talking about it being 20% of the students reading. So thinking that it's not like every day we're going to hit them with something that's too hard for them or is a stretch for them. But at least once a week, they should be experiencing something that is really stretching them. And then maybe by the end of the year, that becomes more, twice a week or something like that. But I thought that was something to keep in mind. I think some teachers are just kind of reacting it with a sense of panic, that all of a sudden everything, they have to throw out everything and bring in all new text that's very difficult. And I don't think that's necessarily.
Well, but I think the other thing you have to think about is they talk about at grade level and stretch. They don't talk about below grade level, at grade level and stretch. So even talking about stretch, and they're talking when they talk stretch about above their grade level. I mean, for us, at grade level is a stretch text for many of our kids. So that's what we're trying to look at first is what can we do at grade level and help them to be able to access it. Because, I mean, when you're getting to the stretch, we haven't even talked about that with those kids who struggle when they read.
They have a whole year.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, we're not saying that, like what you're saying, like the first, quarter of school, we're getting them beyond grade level and they're already reading below grade level. So if you're kind of like just gradually bringing it in, then hopefully by the end of the year.
I guess my thing was, I thought we had started this guided direct instruction of reading at the high school at our 9th and 10th grade with great success for our at-risk kids. And I thought we were, we had it, we were they're making these huge strides in their reading, and then suddenly it's like, okay, now here you go. Here you need to be doing at grade level and above with those kids when they're not at grade level. And I really don't think ever the standards take into consideration that. It seems like it's always that idea that, well, because we're asking more of these kids, they're going to meet it lower at the lower grade levels, and so they'll just be going along and they'll be at the grade level they need to be at reading, and that's not reality. And so I just wish sometimes that idea for the at-risk kid, the struggling reader, was more taken into consideration for those kids, because just hoping or writing down on paper that they should be at or above their grade level in reading doesn't mean that that's reality. And so we forget those kids a lot of times, and it's not really fair. We have a lot of those kids in my district.
They're all over, every district.
Thank you.
Could I just say